So interactivity isn't just for games anymore. This week, we're looking at how voice platforms have opened the door for interactive storytelling. We're seeing it not just for entertainment purposes, but also for news content. Nicky Birch is a commissioning exec for BBC Voice and AI, and she produces interactive audio for both voice platforms and podcasts, including in news content. Nicky, thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
Give us a rough outline of the borders of interactive audio storytelling. What are kind of the different levels of interactivity that we see in audio storytelling?
I think it's really interesting. It's so broad, right? You can have audio storytelling in the most linear form, which is a podcast, and that can be interactive. And that's really, where at the end of a podcast, somebody might say, well, if you're interested in following this path A and path B, you can listen to a different bit of audio, but that has some level of interaction choice. And then you can have a more, I suppose, more in-depth and involved, right up to the point where you can have audio or augmented reality, which I can kind of go on to talk about, which is something which is much more sort of technical and much more kind of enriched your world. But in between that, there's a whole level, a kind of cascade of different experiences, and they're really determined often by what platform you're listening on, whether that's AR or VR or text or video or voice or multiple platforms, or also there's location work. So is the interactive audio experience locative, so based on where you are at any one time? Is it an experiential piece where you have to go, you are, like if you went to a museum or an art exhibition, you are having an experience in the moment? Is it more of a lean back listen where there's less interaction and it's a bit more passive, like a kind of more like a traditional audio or radio experience, but with some interaction, what we might call a kind of lean back, or is it a lean forward where the audience is asked to interact and engage the whole time? So you can see there's a kind of whole host of different types of audio interactions that are possible. And I think the other thing is, I mentioned sort of multi-platform. There's audio interactions that also involve other interactions like multi-sensory, like touch as well. So where audio is just one part of an interactivity.
So within that range, where are we seeing, people actually doing it? Like what parts of interactive storytelling are kind of becoming a thing and which parts of it are still more in the experimental stages?
So the work in my current position, just to be clear, I'm not working on interactive storytelling as a commissioner in the BBC, but I've come from BBC Research and Development, where I've done a fair bit of interactive storytelling work, and prior to that I had my own company where we did some interactive storytelling for voice platforms. And so I was kind of deeply immersed in this for a few years, and in that time I felt there was lots of artwork. It's a really exciting when it comes to kind of looking at artists and people doing great things on location, and using mobile devices, and using binaural sounds, and really helping to kind of enrich storytelling based on where they are or when the user moves around a space. And I think there's lots of really exciting pieces, and I'm happily send you some links to share with the students, to where you can kind of listen to some or find out about them, because there's lots of fantastic work out there. These are niche pieces of work. It's not a mainstream. There's no kind of big Pokemon Go of the interactive audio storytelling, right? It's a niche thing, and but those are the people who are sort of pushing at the technology and exploring what can be done using. And they stretch from, I think a lot of people who have experience in interactive theatre have often moved over and used digital devices to kind of enhance their work or explore what else they can do. So there's some really kind of out there theatre groups in the UK, like Punch Drunk, who have done lots of interesting work in this space. And it's a kind of, I'd say there's the theatre people, there's the sort of traditional audio people, there's the storytellers, and then there's the sort of brands who kind of have got involved, and then probably lose step back when they realize there's not necessarily the big audiences there. So it's an interesting time where technology is making all this possible, but it's quite expensive to do some of these things well. And so who's paying for it, who's pushing it, who's marketing it, means that I'd say, as I said, there isn't the sort of big interactive hit like there is in gaming, which is sort of the final thing, is the ones that are more game-like. So the sort of, you've got theatre makers, the storytellers, the audio sort of gurus, and then you've got the gamers. And the gaming is where the kind of the money is on this side of things, and probably where a lot of experience in terms of interactivity is. So I think, it's anywhere within that circle of expertise you're likely to find interactive audio storytelling sitting.
So my sense has been with the interactive audio storytelling that most people, if they're familiar with it, is kind of, as you mentioned, from like the museum tours or those, tours based on location, and you get a piece of sound that kind of relates to where you are. Or on the other end of it, it's more that choose your own adventure story on voice platforms like Alexa or Google Assistant. But I feel like we're now starting to see some of those same capabilities applied to news. And I know BBC has done some work with interactive news bulletins. Tell me a little bit about, what's happening in news with documentaries and news bulletins and that kind of approach to interactive storytelling applied to journalism.
Yeah, it's really interesting what's happening in terms of news, because I think, like anything, attention spans are short, tiny, even micro, and people are looking at new ways to try and push information, and I think also facts. It's really important to get, and particularly the BBC, it's really clear to try and get the messaging correct and get the information out. And so people are experimenting with how you deliver news in many different ways. And the BBC's got a department called Newslabs, which is looking at kind of technology meets news. And we also, in the voice department, we also are exploring new ways to deliver news. So there's a kind of coming at it in different angles. And I thought I'd just cover some of the things that the BBC is doing, because I think it's interesting. It's storytelling in not in the kind of boldly interactive way that perhaps some of the locative artwork is, but it's taking essences of some of that. So we launched an interactive news service over a year ago on Amazon Alexa, and that is you can ask for BBC News, and what you get is a normal traditional audio bulletin, but if you don't want the story that you're listening to, you can skip on to the next one. So I actually don't want to hear about coronavirus today, thank you very much, I'll skip on to the next one. But if you want to hear more from any story, or you want to have it explained a bit more detail, you can ask for more. So you effectively have a kind of skippable news with a drop down ask for more tabs. So it's doing that same kind of thing of like, I want to tailor my knowledge, right? It also what it helps, it's about giving people control, right? So true personalization in this instance isn't really possible, but we can kind of tailor it to you a bit more. So, and it's especially good. So the BBC has public service values. It's paid for by a license fee, and it really kind of represents those public service values by it helps us to kind of understand. By asking for more, I can understand the background, the content, the perspective, and I think the other thing is it helps people discover additional BBC content. So one of the things they're doing is you may hear in the bulletin, you may hear a story on coronavirus, but actually earlier that day there was a great piece about the vaccine trials going well. And what they're doing is they're really using the small bulletin at the top, the headline news, to sort of tease this great piece about a longer piece about the vaccination trials. And so it's sort of saying, hey, look, if you're interested in this story, here's the sort of headline, but really there's a load more interesting stuff here. And we're finding the evidence is showing that actually audiences aren't really interested in skipping, but they are interested in asking for more. So that is one of the things that has been, and actually the success, it's slowly creeping up. The numbers of the use case of interactive news is, like a lot of news over the last 6 months, has gone up, but this has done very well, and we're very pleased with the outcome.
How hard has it been to almost, train people on how to get more? I think when we've done some work at NPR in this space, we've found that's kind of tricky. Like, what did you do? How hard was that? Have people really taken to this, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't take credit for this because I don't run the news operation, but I know that Julian Bakari, who runs the news team, they started off doing the bulletins like you would do a normal radio bulletin, and then they realized that that wasn't the right approach. You had to, as I said, you had to start as thinking of them as teasers rather than here's a straight bulletin, here's a bit more information. It was really like one is leading on to the other. And really what you're doing is a shop window. And I think so it's about changing the script and really just using it as a way of kind of, enticing people in. And it seems to be working. It's definitely increased. And I think we're trying to roll that model out in other areas. So where does that go beyond news? And where can we use that kind of ask for more across other BBC, estates as well?
So are there some other ways that the BBC has been experimenting with interactivity in some of its news coverage?
Yeah, they've done a fair bit. They want to try and encourage, as I said, how people are encourage knowledge and encourage people to inquire and ask questions. And so they've done a bit of work on something called Expanders, and I can show you a link on Expanders. Hold on a sec. So there's a thing here called an explainer builder, which what they've done is it's a kind of there's a nice blog post here that explains how they've done the explainer builder, and it's really about what they've done is they've asked little questions. They basically they've sort of thought about in advance what questions people might have on in this case this was I think the American elections. So you get to ask your question. Do you have a question about the primaries or the election? And they basically they thought, okay, we pretty much know what people are going to ask, but then it sort of jumps to that information there. So again, it's a sort of level of interactivity by making people feel like, oh, okay, you've answered my question here, and that's within the story. And from there, I'm going to give you, once I've asked, okay, what is the difference between a primary and a caucus? Okay, up it comes, all that information. So it's sort of helping you explain the story in a bit more detail.
I can imagine from the point of view of the folks working on this, there's some real editorial challenges, both in figuring out, okay, what questions might people ask, and then some technical challenges in how do you then get the systems to learn to recognize the questions that are asked. News, as we talked about in one of the lectures, involves a lot of new concepts, and the systems haven't always learned about those concepts. Have you run into, both those editorial and technical challenges in making the systems able to recognize questions that humans have?
Yes, and I think so. We've done a bit of work on bots as well. So in the same way, I think it has a similar or even more complicated situation. So we launched a Corona bot, which we put inside BBC Facebook page. And within that, we actually had a team of people who were working, 7 days a week, answering questions or writing answers, writing answers that people would ask. And, the news was changing, when can I go outside? How many people can come at my house? If the US is anything like the UK, it was incredibly complicated, or still is complicated to get that right. And so, we're having to have people. It was a very high staffed, well staffed operation. And I think, to say it's that we have that sort of, I think, misconception that it's all going to be AI doing all of this, whereas actually it's not, right? This is difficult information and needs to be, particularly when you're working for a news body, right? You need to be delivered this properly. You can't rely on, you can't leave that to kind of computers to get that right. So, and I think one of the interesting thing about the Corona bot and Quartz, and I think ABC did a bot. I don't know if NPR's done a bot, but it's quite a challenge. I think we found it. It's an interesting thing to sort of marry with news. So for us, I perhaps Facebook was the wrong platform for it to go on, but for various reasons, you know, how these things kind of, it was a good test to see whether audiences are interested in it. But I think, and we need to look, you know, about what's the advantage for audiences to be communicating and asking in this way. Is it how people ask questions, or are they more likely to do it as a demonstration I just shown you within a story that they're reading when they want more information? So it's a bit of like there's a lot of technical challenge. There's also some editorial. There's you know, there's ethical. There's kind of resourcing. It's a really interesting project.
Tick through us real quickly. What are some of the ethical challenges as you see that?
Well, I think, you know, getting that in, you know, people asking questions and you getting the news line correct. Right. So you're not it's an information service as well as, so in the time of a pandemic, it's an information service that's very key to you getting it right. And it's not, you know, we have public service to remit to be unbiased, but it's very important that you're surfacing the correct information that is published by. So we have a National Health Service, and so we worked in conjunction with the National Health Service in order to provide the correct information from them. But then you've also got the government issues, and then you've got lots and lots of nuance in there. So, you know, but why is it okay for me to go to the pub when it's not okay for me to have the same amount of people over to my house? And, you know, these kinds of questions, which it's full of really difficult, challenging questions. So you have to kind of be able to respond in a way that, you know, is correct, but isn't telling anyone the wrong information, but also isn't an opinion, because you're representing the BBC.
So with your own production company, you've worked on some interactive podcasts and projects like the Financial Times Hidden Cities. When you approach an interactive production, what do you kind of have to do that's different from if you were doing a more, you know, normal non-interactive production?
Okay, good question. So yeah, Hidden Cities is an interactive storytelling piece where, using Google Assistant, you travel around Berlin and you can go and experience different locations of Berlin just in audio, and then using your voice you can move around. And there's a sort of in some places there's a number of different people you can speak to depending on who you like to choose. And I'm just going to show you, I've got a little deck which I did, which I think it explains a little bit about some of the decision making, and I'll skip through it because it could be quite long otherwise, and we'll be here forever. So Hidden Cities Berlin is an interactive audio tour around Berlin. It was done in conjunction with the Financial Times and which is a newspaper in the UK, and Google Assistant. So what we did, I can hear.
Okay, Google, talk to Hidden Cities.
Hidden Cities Berlin from the Financial Times is an interactive audio experience where you get to choose which side of Berlin you want to hear. From the clubs,
maybe 2 hours pass, maybe 15 or 20 hours pass,
to the lakes.
We prefer, most of the Berliners, to swim naked.
Explore Hidden Cities Berlin by asking your Google Assistant, okay Google, talk to Hidden Cities.
Okay, it's not going to be such a big advert for it the whole way through, I promise. And what I'm just going to jump through, and what we did in terms of thinking about it before we started is really kind of think about some key questions. Why would you interact rather than listen passively? How do we make it so it's intuitive? How do you feel when you're in this experience? What is it that's compelling in here? Who's the audience? How can we tailor this experience for multiple users? How do we keep them listening? I don't think we answered all of these successfully, but I think it's a really interesting thoughts to set up at the beginning. We had some design constraints, and I think particularly one of the key things when you're working in audio interaction is when you've only got voice and you haven't got visuals, is that people cannot remember 2, possibly 3 options at any time. You can't say to people, right, option 1, do this, option 2, 3, 4, 5. You're only really going to remember what 2, possibly 3. And so I think, it's really understanding how people's brains work in audio. And I think crucially, which I sort of touched on before, audio generally is a passive medium. And so with this experience, we're asking, this is a very much a lean forward experience. And so trying to think about where they would be when they were doing this, because most people have their Google Assistant they do in the UK. They're not in cars that much yet. They're mostly kind of in the home, and people don't tend to use them when they're out and about. So this is, again, it's not perfect environment for sitting there and interacting with audio, because you're generally, when you're listening to audio, you're kind of moving around doing other things. So we accept there are some limitations, but so we looked at the story, we looked at kind of the sound design, we designed for inattention, so you could drop in and out of this experience and come back to it any time. And we sort of set up expectations and always telling the user how long this is and what you need to do all the time. So that was really key. And then we thought about the flow. So we ended up, this is what I call the string of pearls flow. So you start off in one place and you basically move around the pearls to, in each location, one is a lake, one is the castle, and one is the club scene. And within each sort of pearl, you can move around and speak to any number of people. But you're always going in the same direction. You're never kind of lost. So you can kind of jump between locations, but you can never go backwards. Right?
And I think in audio, it's tricky because, you don't have the visuals to orient yourself to. And I think it's hard to remember that, almost mental model or that map and the things you need to say to be able to get from point A to point B. So it almost seems like audio has some inherent challenges when it comes to interactivity.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. And I think, you not only that, you also have to explain everything in audio.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to explain things in audio, because without just being really, really verbose and having really long explainers, right? What you don't realize is when you've got a screen, there's lots of things you can do that really kind of cuts corners, right? You can have a kind of little settings burger. Oh yeah, I know that's settings. I can have a little play screen, and a triangle. I know that means play. Yeah, you've got these simple UX sort of tools that help us get to that point, or shortcuts. But in audio, you don't. If you just have audio, you don't have any of that. So you've got the scripting is absolutely key, because you have to think, okay, how can I say everything I want to say in as little as possible words? So it's just being really clever. So we had two types of interaction questions. We had a simple kind of binary question, which would, do you want to hear this clip or this clip? Okay, so you've chosen my next content. But we also had any response interaction. So it's like, hey man, do you want to go and see, I can't remember the name of the text of it now because it was a while ago, but it'd be like, hey, let's go in, do you want to come with me to see the next part of the club scene? And you go, yeah. Or what do you like about going on holiday? And you go, I love just relaxing. And that takes you onto a new piece. So it doesn't really matter what you say, but it moves you on to the next. Everyone has the same journey at that point, but it helps you feel like you're having a conversation or part of a more natural dialogue that isn't always choose A, choose B. So I think that really helps. And we
do you want to hear?
Sorry, I'm gonna jump out of it here. So I think that's probably explains it all. But I'll send you the deck anyway, so you can kind of see. And actually, one thing that might be useful, the final thing actually, was that when we made this, we had, if you can see this sort of map, there was ended up being 125 different locations, 330 individual audio files, 650 uploads. So it becomes the kind of really quite a complex piece. Even what was a relatively, when you're listening from an audience's perspective, it might feel quite simple, but from a technical perspective, it's actually still quite challenging.
Impressive. Thank you for that walkthrough on that. So tell me, where do you see interactivity and audio storytelling going? What's next?
So if you'd have asked me this a year ago, or I'd say a year ago, I was really excited about audio augmented reality and the Bose headphones. And they had released the Bose glasses and headphones where you had kind of head tracking, and you had binaural content, and you could create content that you for these devices, and they also had voice control. And I was like, wow, this is everything. This is head tracking, voice control, binaural content, and binaural audio, sorry. And I was, we were creating we had a couple of really interesting projects on the go in BBC R&D, where we had a multiplayer audio experience where people were using sort of physical, there was sort of, physical game playing, role playing with each other. And there was 4 of them, and everyone having these glasses on and headphones on. And that was really exciting. We were understanding how that works. And then we had another piece, which was a drama where you were based in a park, any park around the world. It understood, it used the map of Google Maps, and it recognized where the boundaries of this park were, and you had to kind of go and explore the park and find different bits of audio. And it was really involved and really great. And then they canned it. Then it wasn't enough sales, and they took it back. So I feel like slightly broken by that experience, because that was really exciting. But I think, if I'm really honest, that goes back to what I was saying right at the beginning, which was it's quite art house, it's quite niche, and it's trying to find the mainstream experience, what is going to work for mainstream audiences. And I think that's why sort of BBC News and the work that's being done around there is actually much more kind of likely to hit home. And so I would suggest, in terms of where I'm interested in from a sort of platform and technology level, I'm interested in what Apple AirPods could do, and whether Apple would open that up and allow us to use the AirPods, because it's so mainstream and people have them, a lot of people have them, and what that allows us to do in future. And then from a kind of content side, I think it's not about, and I'm saying this because someone who's looked at it from a technology side, I would say it's not about the technology. It's about delivering the best content in kind of emotional ways that connect with your audience, and not to be driven by what the technology can do. So I suppose on the one hand, I'm saying I'm excited by technology, but on the other hand, I recognize that when you put all your eggs in one technology's basket and it all falls apart, it can be quite depressing.
So for the journalists and storytellers in this class, what advice do you have if they're interested in, working in interactive storytelling, in journalism that uses an interactive, audio component? What advice do you have?
I would say there's a couple of things. So from a technical perspective, I would play with some of the technology, because use VoiceFlow. I know that Amazon have got a load of new voices they've developed. So they've got this sort of long form speech style, which is open to US developers. Which means you can have different voices reading longer texts, and you could kind of amalgamate that with a tool like VoiceFlow, which enables non-developers very easily to have a go at making their own voice-enabled interactive audio experiences. So I think that's worth just having a play with, and you might find, if you put journalism at the heart of that, right, then you've got something really interesting. And what I mean by that, I'm going to rewind. I don't know if you saw a few years ago, the Financial Times did a piece about what it's like to be an Uber driver. And they interviewed a load of Uber drivers, and what they did is they then turned their interviews into a bit like a game where you could experience, and you are an Uber driver, and you are having to make decisions of whether you should pick up this person, despite the fact that you've only made so and so money today, and this person, you get there and it turns out they're not there, or it turns out that the percentages you're making that day, you've lost it because of something happens. And these are all based on real experiences from Uber drivers. And what it's done is as a player, you're suddenly seeing, from the player's perspective, you have to kind of get through the day and earn enough money to take home to kind of pay your living, help yourself for that day. But it's suddenly transformed, because it's all based on real information and real data and real interviews, that it's so much more powerful. So my kind of second point is although play around with the technology, it's still about the simple stories, well told, mixing journalism with storytelling, like that FT Uber driver experience is where the sort of powerful, hit home is going to work. I think, although it's good to understand the platform and technology, it's really about the stories that matter.
Nicky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much.
If you want to see any of the projects that Nicky and I have been discussing, we've got links on the screen. You can also follow her on Twitter.